Steph Lee, founder of Host Agency Reviews. You are tuning in for the Friday 15, where every Friday at 12 p.m. Central Time, we answer the industry questions you have submitted by going to hostagencyreviews.com/Friday15. And welcome to our guest today. We have co-host with us, no stranger to the Friday 15. Hello, Lindsay Taylor Lauer from Travel Leaders 365.
Hello, Steph. How are you?
Good. That was a long title for you. That was a big hello. I am wonderful because it's Friday. How can you not be wonderful?
I don't know.
I know. Well, welcome everybody. Just a few things before we get into today's questions. So, as we've been mentioning the last couple of weeks, our call for speakers is open right now for Host Week. And if you have never attended Host Week, it is a wealth of information. It's a free virtual event we put on the last week in January every year. And we have these little educational sessions as well as host agency and consortia interviews. But these education sessions are called EduSpots. Lindsay, you did one last year. How was it?
It was great. It was so much fun.
It is. There's great audience interactions. I'm going to put a link to Host Week so you all can check it out. But great audience interaction. And if you are someone, even if you've never done a speaking gig before, but you have something to share or something you've done at your agency or something, anything creative, we would love to have you apply. So you can go to hostagencyreviews.com/speakers, and I will put the link in the show notes as well. But it does close in mid-September, so make sure to get that application in soon. And if you're a host agency like Lindsay or a supplier and you know of advisors that you think would be really great at teaching something, don't be afraid to give them a nudge and send them over that link to plant that seed. That's all I wanted to say, really, I think. So let's see, Lindsay. First question is from Justine M. Justine asks a very simple question. Part of my niche will be planning retreats. Is there anything different to learn from booking groups?
Not really. It's very similar. You're going to have similar organizational structures. You're going to have kind of similar considerations. You're just going to add in whatever makes it a retreat. So whoever's doing the retreating, if you're going to bring a yoga person or whatever, you just make sure that you kind of filter that in and then you take their costs into account. And then you just build that into your pricing. But it's similar. If you're used to planning groups, planning retreats is a very, very easy thing to do.
Yeah. So if they haven't been used to planning groups, though, and say they've just been individual travelers, what's the difference between that and moving to groups?
Organization. So basically, it's going to come down to instead of just having one group of people, one tiny little group of people, a family or whoever couple, you're going to have several different ones. And so you're going to have generally different airport origination points. You're going to have different room category options. Sometimes you're going to have different, just kind of everything is different. So you have to track the information. You have to be able to communicate that information to your suppliers. Your pricing is going to change really quickly as well, because versus just, let's say you're marking something up. Let's say your supplier is giving you net rates. You're going to mark that up. Very easy to take that into account with just a single client or a single family. When you're working with a larger group of people, you have many different moving parts. And then at that point, you really have to be aware of your pricing sheets and making sure that you're taking into account, this person is going to be taking the train. So this is going to impact this. This person needs that transfer. This is how it's all going to work out. So just far more moving parts. And then the pricing you really need to take into it and making sure that you're getting paid as well, because that frequently is what falls by the wayside. So make sure that you're pricing out your group trip so that you're actually making a margin on it. Keeping in mind when you're working group rates with hotels, it's generally not going to be a normal commission rate. It's going to be whatever they contract you. And that's another component as well as the contracting, which you also have to organize, keep on top of, make sure that whoever needs to be signing it, if you're signing it, if your client's signing it, I recommend your client signing everything, just for your own protection.
Me too.
But so those are all the different things that are going to kind of come into play when you're working with groups, which would then lead itself to a retreat as well. When you have any additional component, that's really when the pricing comes into play, because you want to spread that cost out amongst all of the travelers. Obviously, you're going to have special considerations. Let's say you're planning a music group, a choir, a church choir kind of a thing. Generally speaking, the director is going to be expecting his whole trip to be comped. So you have to build that pricing into the other price. So it just kind of comes down to what your client is expecting of you, ensuring that you have adequate organization to sort out the pricing and the opportunity overall.
Yeah, I would agree that the organization is key because really it's just a single booking scaled. And so on a single booking, if you forget to mention a few things, it's not a big deal. On a group booking, if you forget it, you're answering it 30 times and you can save yourself a lot of time by thinking about the workflow ahead, having everything organized. And one thing I had a call a couple of weeks ago with someone from Squad Trip, I think it's called. Hold on, let me look this up really quick. Yeah, Squad Trip. So they do the collection of money, and so you can manage the bookings. Like if you have people that have ocean view, if they want that, it's going to be one price. If they're going to do the garden view, it's this price. Um, all sorts of things. So it makes it a lot easier to collect payments from your clients, and you can put in the due dates. And of course, we all know, make sure you don't actually put the due date in that's in your contract. Give yourself 2 weeks because people are going to miss that due date and they will be very sad if they get a fee along with that. So, one of the other things I want to put in there for you, Justine, I'll put Squad Trip in there for a link in the show notes, but Mary wrote an article about booking group travels. It's a 3-part series, and I'll link to that. We talk to suppliers about what they want advisors to know about booking groups. We talk to advisors that do groups and the top 10 tips they need to know, and then also how to find and market groups. So I'll link to those. I'm also going to link to our Travel Agent Chatter, which is our long form podcast where we do it usually quarterly, and it really goes in depth on an advisor, how they do things and what makes them successful. And quite a few of them do groups. So I'm going to link to the ones that I think are really fun and more focused on groups so that if anyone's interested, you can learn a ton from listening to these and the ideas that these advisors have. And I think that's all the resources we have. I feel like after every question, I was like, Har's got a resource for that. Let me link to it.
Groups are one of those things too, until you've done it. It's just all hypothetical. And so then once you've done it, you're like, oh, hated that way I did that. And then you kind of figure out how
You
to
learn.
yeah, there's a degree of trial and error there as well.
Yeah. So great to think about it ahead of time though, so you can limit that as much as possible. Number 2 question comes in from anonymous, and I think the next one is after that too. We've got some shy people this week. So this is from anonymous 1. How would you recommend handling payments done in installments, either paying a deposit and balance due or using a tool that breaks up payments even further? Do you send the client a credit card authorization each time there is a payment? Okay, you know what? There's a lot of questions in this one. Let's start with that question. I was just looking, I'm like, oh, there's 3 more
Just
questions.
keep going.
Okay. So, Lindsay, do you send the client a credit card authorization each time there is a payment?
For different, if it's a different supplier being charged, yes. So I do it by supplier. So, but I know the total amount that's going to be charged, and then typically, so if let's say it's one supplier A, and let's say supplier A says you have to make a deposit and then final payment by this day, and so then the client will say, I want to go ahead and here's my deposit, and then each month I want you to charge me $400, whatever it's going to get until the final payment. I'll spell that out in that authorization. I'll just put a little note in so that it's very clear what the client is agreeing to, how they're going to agree to it. So
Mhm.
when that opportunity arises, I'm happy to do it in that way. Um, if you've done that, you're pretty much clear. Anytime you're introducing a new supplier that the credit card is going to be charged against, I want that in writing. Most of this is all. So I had an attorney tell me once, everything is all just in theory until it goes to court. So theoretically, you want to have all your ducks in a row so that should it ever go to court, God forbid, you can easily prove to whoever's looking at it, no, they were aware that this is what I was going to be charging. They signed off on this. So that's kind of the
Mhm.
logic that I would encourage anyone to use.
That sounds good. All right, next question is, do you create a document specifically outlining the payment dates and have one ongoing authorization from the credit card holder?
So kind of, but again, you don't want to, box yourself in. So if the client wants to pay that way, go for it. If they want to just pay the deposit and then later on pay the final payment, do that. I think as advisors, we can kind of get ourselves stuck in a rut of being too prescriptive as far as this goes. But generally speaking, as long as your client knows this is the amount that is going to be charged, they've acknowledged it, they've signed it, this is the support, they see it, you're pretty good.
Mhm. And last question on this. So, should you send regular balance statements or simply forward the confirmation/invoices from the supplier after you've made the payment?
I typically just forward whatever the supplier has sent. So if I'm not the one charging, it's all about who's holding the money. If I'm not holding the money, I'm not creating any additional narrative to that because I have no control over the money. I'm the middleman. I paid that for the client to the supplier. And so I'm just going to communicate back what the supplier has said. If for some reason I'm taking the money directly, which sometimes happens, then yes, I will happily provide them that because at that point the money is in my account and I have the control over that.
Yeah,
But
and no one's gonna create an invoice for that since it's yours, so
exactly. And so, but I try not to create additional narratives on top of other people's policies as well with the supplier information in their confirmations and their invoices that they send. Frequently, they'll have very pertinent travel information that you want to make sure your client receives. And I find if you try to interrupt that too much, they might not get the message that they need. And then you could be liable for misinformation.
perfect. Let's see. So our last question again from another anonymous source. Let's see. Sorry in advance, just getting processes started and I'm new and trying to understand. So when talking about booking flights, when it talks about ARC or ARC, IATA, IATAN, what is ticketing? Oh, this one has a couple questions too. I'm just going to do one at a time. Okay, first question. So when talking about booking flights, when it talks about ARC, IATA, IATAN, what is ticketing versus non-ticketing?
Do you want to do it? Do you want me to do it?
I can do it or you can do it. It's up to you.
Whatever's good. So basically the difference is in the ticketing function within GDS, can you issue tickets? So that's kind of the long and short of it. When I first started in the industry, gajillion years ago, I learned native Sabre. I could ticket in native Sabre. As time has gone on, I have no desire to ticket anything. I want my air team to do it because it is very complex. And especially now that they've introduced this NDC stuff, I have no desire to go anywhere near air. I want my professional team to handle that for me. So in that case, if I were starting my own agency right now, because I have an air desk, if I needed to have an IATA number, I would probably do non-ticketing because I would just want that access to hotels pretty much is what that would give you access to. The function of that is so that you can book things directly with the hotel or via GDS, however you want to do it. But you're going to basically have that connectivity that you need to book. If you have the ticketing function, that ticketing is going to be specific to air, and then that's going to be the additional layer. I do caution advisors who are new to the industry about diving in too deeply into ticketing their own air. If you don't know what you don't know, debit memos are what the airlines issue as a penalty if you do things incorrectly. And you can do a whole lot of things incorrectly. So just being very careful about not putting yourself in a sticky, expensive situation by trying to ticket air. So that would be my explanation.
Yes. So a couple things. There were some acronyms in there people may not be familiar with. So NDC is the new distribution capability, and it's a hot mess. I don't
It's
know
a
how else to
hot mess.
describe it.
It's a mess. It's a swampy, nasty mess.
Yeah, it's something that airlines are implementing that agencies are fighting that makes it very difficult. It's specific though to the GDS, which is the global distribution system. And if you're not familiar with that, I'm going to put an article that kind of explains what the GDS or global distribution system is. Sabre, which Lindsay mentioned, is one of the GDSs. And then yeah, the ticketing versus non-ticketing, it really has to do with it having a GDS system and getting access into the GDS system. So meaning you can book those airline tickets or not. New advisors, you should always be non-ticketing if you have no experience in the GDS. Even if you want to be ticketing, you're not going to be able to get approved. So not even something you need to worry about. Second question in here. For instance, if I have an ARC VTC, which is verified travel counselor, I think, if I have an ARC VTC credential number, but you are unable to book flights, wait, hold on. I'm sorry, I should have read this beforehand. Okay, let me read the two questions together. If having an ARC VTC credential number, but you are unable to book flights, same question on the IATA side with the IATA credentialing. Is the difference in the ticketing versus non-ticketing option being that non-ticketing cannot book flights?
Yes.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah, it's really confusing for those that just we threw a lot of acronyms at you, but I think the big thing to know is so ARC and IATA are both associations within the travel industry. ARC is very specific to the United States. IATA is worldwide, and they both have to do with airline ticketing. And so they have these accreditation numbers. And if you have these accreditation numbers, they used to only offer ticketing, but as more people went away from using the GDSs, now they offer a non-ticketing option. And that would be for someone that is just looking for an accreditation, like a CLIA accreditation would be very similar to a non-ticketing. And I'll link to our article on travel agency accreditation options for people that are curious more what ARC and IATA accreditation is like. Lindsay also mentioned debit memos, which is again something that's very specific to the GDS. And I'm going to link to an article on that describes what they are, and why, like Lindsay says, they can be very expensive, and why you would want to stay away from them. So I think that's about, that was honestly the most acronyms I have ever done in Friday 15 within
We need like a chart with the
that's what I felt like. I should have read these more carefully before we came on the air, because I was like, oh, wow, that's a lot. So thank you for bearing with us, everybody. Lindsay, if someone wants to talk to you and be like, what in the world did you just say the last 4 minutes?
What are all those acronyms you just used?
Yeah, what's the best way for them to reach out to you?
ltaylor@tl365.com.
Perfect. And I'm also going to put a link to you guys' profile, because you host advisors. So I'll put a link there if anyone's interested in their hosting program, just to give everyone a heads up for what we've got coming down the pipeline at Friday 15. This September 1st, we have Departure Lounge. Keith Walden from Departure Lounge will be co-hosting. The following Friday, September 8th, we have Uniglobe Travel Center. They will be involved with the Friday 15. They're sponsoring it. And then, if you remember from earlier, I was talking about our host week speaker applications, call for speakers. After September 8th, also mark your calendars, because that's when you're going to want to get those applications in for host week, because September 15th is when that closes. And that's also when we'll be having Nexion on as our co-host. So thank you, everyone, for joining us today. Just a reminder, if you haven't signed up already for our e-reminders, there are 630 other lovely souls that have signed up for these e-reminders, which means you'll know ahead of time what the questions are, who the co-host is, and the link to join us. You can go sign up at hostagencyreviews.com/Friday15. Lindsay, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Steph.
All right, everyone, have a wonderful weekend. We will see you next Friday.
Bye.